In August 1928, an ordinary evening in Glasgow, Scotland appeared destined to be forgotten. There was no courtroom, no judge, no lawyer preparing arguments, no indication that one of the most influential legal decisions in history was quietly beginning. Instead, it started inside a small café. A woman sat with a friend. A bottle of ginger beer was purchased. The drink was poured. And according to the woman, something horrifying emerged from the bottle. The partially decomposed remains of a snail. At first glance, the incident seemed insignificant. A customer had received a contaminated product. Such events happen every day. Most are forgotten almost immediately. Yet this particular complaint would travel from a local cafe in Glasgow to the highest court in the United Kingdom. Along the way, it would force judges to answer a question that had troubled lawyers for generations. What responsibility does one person owe to another? When can someone be held legally accountable for causing harm? And perhaps most importantly, can a manufacturer be sued by someone who never bought anything directly from them? The answers would transform the law forever. Nearly a century later, law students across the world continue to study the case. Judges continue to cite it. Businesses continue to operate under principles that emerged from it. And it all began with a bottle of ginger beer. This is the story of Donoghue versus Stevenson, the case that created modern negligence law.
To understand the significance of the case, it is necessary to return to Scotland in the late 1920s. The world was changing rapidly. The First World War had ended only a decade earlier. Cities were expanding. Factories were producing goods on a massive scale. Consumers increasingly relied on products manufactured by companies they would never meet. Food, medicine, beverages, and household items moved through complex supply chains before reaching the public. Trust became essential. Consumers trusted manufacturers. Manufacturers trusted distributors. Society assumed that products reaching the market were reasonably safe. But the law had not fully adapted to this reality. At the time, bringing a successful legal claim against a manufacturer was difficult. In many situations, a contract was required before any legal remedy could exist. Without that relationship, the law offered limited protection. This gap in the system would soon become central. On the evening of August 26, 1928, a woman named May Donoghue visited the Well Meadow Café in Paisley, Scotland. She was accompanied by a friend. The friend ordered a bottle of ginger beer manufactured by David Stevenson. The bottle was dark and opaque, making its contents impossible to inspect. The café served the drink. Part of it was poured into a glass containing ice cream. Donoghue consumed it without issue. Everything appeared normal. Then the remainder of the bottle was poured. According to Donoghue, what emerged next was deeply disturbing. The remains of a decomposed snail. The sight allegedly shocked her. She later claimed it caused severe illness and nervous shock. Whether the snail was truly present would later be disputed. But at that moment, the legal importance of the event
Was not yet known. It appeared to be nothing more than a consumer complaint. Yet beneath it, a far larger legal question was forming. Who should bear responsibility when a product causes harm? For many people, the answer seemed obvious. If a product causes harm, the manufacturer should pay. But in 1928, the law was not so simple. A major obstacle stood in Donoghue's way. She had not purchased the ginger beer. Her friend had. This created a legal problem. Under existing law, Contractual rights existed only between parties to a contract. The cafe owner bought the product. The friend received it. But Donoghue herself had no legal relationship with the manufacturer. As a result, many believed her claim would fail. She appeared trapped by a technicality. A harmful product may have injured her, yet no clear legal remedy existed. But Donoghue chose to proceed. She obtained legal representation from Walter Leachman. He recognized an opportunity to challenge the structure of legal responsibility itself. Instead of relying on contract law, he argued something more fundamental: that manufacturers owe a direct duty of care to consumers. This was a bold argument. At the time, the law had no clear general principle defining such responsibility. It was fragmented and inconsistent. The lawsuit was filed against David Stevenson. The allegation was simple: the product was unsafe and caused harm. The manufacturer denied liability. He argued there was no contract and therefore no responsibility. The dispute entered the courts. What began as a cafe incident became a legal battle with national significance. The legal system was now being forced to confront a question it had long avoided. What duties exist between strangers? And how far does responsibility extend? The answer would not come easily. The case was only beginning its journey.
As the legal claim against David Stevenson moved forward, the case stopped being a simple dispute over a contaminated drink. It became something far larger, a direct challenge to the structure of legal responsibility itself. At the center of the dispute was a question the courts had never clearly answered. When no contract exists between two people, can one still be legally responsible for harm caused? Stevenson's legal team relied on established legal tradition. They argued that responsibility required a contractual relationship. Without a direct agreement between manufacturer and consumer, no duty of care could exist. In their view, the law was clear. A manufacturer sold products to intermediaries. Those intermediaries sold to consumers. Responsibility ended at the point of sale. Under this reasoning, Stevenson could not be held liable for harm suffered by someone who never purchased his product directly. At the time, this argument carried significant weight. The legal system was built on contract-based relationships, and courts were reluctant to extend liability beyond them. Donoghue's legal team took a different approach. They argued that the law should reflect reality, not just formal relationships. A manufacturer who produces goods intended for public consumption, they said, must owe a direct responsibility to the end user. It was entirely foreseeable that the product would be consumed by people who never interacted with the manufacturer. The ginger beer was not made for a single buyer. It was placed into the stream of commerce for public use. Therefore, the risk extended beyond contractual boundaries. However, this argument faced strong resistance. Judges were cautious about expanding liability too far. They feared that recognizing such a broad duty could open the door to unlimited claims. If manufacturers could be sued by anyone affected by their products, where would the law draw the line? Could liability extend indefinitely for every consequence of a product once it left the factory? The legal system had no clear answer. As the case moved through the Scottish courts, uncertainty grew. Lower courts were hesitant to depart from established doctrine. The claim appeared increasingly fragile. Some observers believed it would ultimately fail due to lack of precedent.
But the case did not end there. It was appealed further until it reached the highest judicial authority in the United Kingdom, the House of Lords. At that point, the case was no longer just about Donoghue or Stevenson. It had become a defining moment for private law itself. The judges were no longer deciding a dispute. They were deciding whether a new legal principle should exist.
By the time the case reached the House of Lords, it had gained national attention within legal circles. It was no longer treated as an ordinary appeal. It was a case with the potential to reshape the foundations of negligence law. The central question was reframed in broader legal terms. Does a person owe a duty to avoid acts or omissions that could reasonably be foreseen as likely to cause harm to another, even without a contract? This question went beyond the facts of the case. It struck at the core of civil liability. If answered positively, it would expand legal responsibility significantly. If answered negatively, many injured individuals would remain without legal protection. Inside the court, two legal philosophies emerged. One side emphasized traditional legal structure. Responsibility, they argued, should remain limited to established categories and contractual relationships. The other side focused on fairness and foreseeability. They argued that legal duty should arise wherever harm is reasonably predictable. One judicial opinion introduced a principle that would transform the law. A person must take reasonable care to avoid acts or omissions that could foreseeably injure their neighbors. In legal terms, neighbors did not mean physical proximity. It referred to people so closely and directly affected by one's actions that they should reasonably be considered when those actions are taken.
This principle changed everything. It moved the law away from rigid contractual boundaries and toward a general duty based on foreseeability and proximity. Applied to this case, the reasoning was direct. A manufacturer producing goods for public consumption must take reasonable care to ensure those goods are safe. Consumers who use those products are clearly affected by the manufacturer's actions. Therefore, a duty of care exists, even without a contract. This marked a fundamental shift in legal thinking. It created a framework that could apply far beyond food and drink manufacturers. It would influence product liability, professional negligence, workplace safety, and personal injury law for generations. The House of Lords accepted this reasoning. In doing so, it confirmed that the law was capable of evolving with modern industrial society. The decision marked a turning point in legal history.
The final judgment confirmed a principle that would redefine negligence law. A manufacturer can owe a direct duty of care to the ultimate consumer, even without any contractual relationship. In this case, David Stevenson was held legally responsible for the harm alleged by May Donoghue. The court recognized that certain relationships create obligations so immediate and direct that a contract is not required. The foundation of the ruling was a newly articulated legal standard. A person must take reasonable care to avoid acts or omissions that could reasonably be foreseen as likely to cause harm to another person who is closely and directly affected by those actions. This became known as the neighbor principle. A neighbor, in legal terms, is anyone who is so closely affected by one's actions that they should reasonably be in contemplation when those actions are taken. This principle transformed negligence law from a fragmented set of rules into a coherent legal doctrine. For the first time, the law recognized a general duty of care, not limited to contracts, not restricted to specific categories, but based on foreseeability, proximity, and responsibility. This judgment became one of the most influential decisions in common law history. It provided the foundation for modern negligence claims across multiple legal systems.
The impact of the decision extended far beyond the facts of the case. It fundamentally reshaped how legal responsibility is understood in modern society. Before this judgment, personal injury claims were limited and inconsistent. Many injured individuals had no clear legal remedy unless a contract existed. After this case, a unifying principle emerged. Manufacturers, professionals, employers, and service providers could now be held accountable for harm caused by negligence, even without direct contractual relationships. The decision became the foundation of modern consumer protection law. It influenced product liability systems across multiple jurisdictions. It also shaped the development of professional negligence, workplace safety standards, and civil liability frameworks. Courts across the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and other common law countries adopted and expanded its reasoning. What began as a dispute over a bottle of ginger beer evolved into one of the most important legal decisions ever made. A single case had created a legal principle that now governs countless aspects of everyday life. From defective products to medical errors to workplace accidents, the concept of duty of care became central to justice in civil law.
Today, the principles established in this case remain deeply embedded in modern legal systems. Whenever a defective product causes harm, courts often rely on the duty of care principle, first clearly articulated in this judgment. Whenever professionals are held responsible for negligent advice or services, the same foundation applies. Even modern expectations of safety, quality control, and corporate responsibility are shaped by this case. What once required judicial innovation has now become standard legal doctrine. The idea that responsibility extends beyond direct contractual relationships is now a fundamental part of civil law across the world. Yet at the time, the decision was far from obvious. It required the courts to move beyond traditional boundaries and recognize that industrial society demanded a broader understanding of responsibility. That shift continues to define legal systems today.
May Donoghue did not set out to change the law. She was simply an ordinary person who believed she had been harmed by a defective product. But her case revealed something far greater about the legal system itself. That law is not static. It evolves with society. That responsibility does not always require a contract. And that harm, when reasonably foreseeable, can create obligations between strangers. A bottle of ginger beer, a small café in Scotland, and a legal claim involving a snail. Together, they reshaped the foundations of modern negligence law. The case of Donoghue v. Stevenson remains one of the most cited judgments in legal history, not because of its unusual facts, but because of the principle it created. A principle that continues to define how the modern world understands responsibility, safety, and justice.
If one bottle of ginger beer could change the law forever, what everyday situation today is waiting to reshape the future of justice